Try leaving, and I swear you'll never see those kids again. His voice cut through the air like glass. The suitcase slipped from my hands, scattering clothes across the hardwood floor. My heart pounded so hard I thought he might hear it. Jason stood in the doorway, his face twisted in fury, veins visible on his temple. The storm outside cast flashes of white light across his eyes, cold, sharp, and dangerous. I'm just taking the kids to my father's, I managed, my voice trembling. It's just for a few days. He laughed. It wasn't humor. It was control. You think you get to decide that? You think you can just walk out of my house? His house. I'd heard those words so many times they had stopped sounding human. They were ownership, disguised as love. Behind me, the faint sound of Emily's crying drifted down the hallway. Ben and Lily huddled together in their room, silent, terrified. I wanted to run to them, to tell them it was okay. But Jason took a step closer, and the air between us tightened like a noose. You ungrateful little, he lunged forward, grabbing the strap of the suitcase and yanking it from my grasp. The fabric tore, scattering shirts and small pairs of socks across the floor. One tiny pink sock, Lily's, landed by my foot. Something inside me cracked. Please, I whispered. Don't do this. The kids. His laugh came out like a growl. You mean the 3 brats you wanted, not me? You think they'll ever respect a mother who can't even keep her husband happy? I flinched. Not because the words were new, but because I could feel the next part coming. The part where words turned into fists. He stepped closer. The smell of whiskey hit me before his breath did. My back touched the wall. There was nowhere left to go. Jason, stop. He raised his hand, and for the first time, I didn't duck. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe I'd already left in my mind. I just stood there, frozen, watching the shadow of his arm lift under the dim light, but before it could fall, the sound of a door opening cut through the chaos. The bathroom door. Jason froze. Mid-motion. A tall silhouette stepped out, calm but steady. The stormlight behind him caught the edge of his face. Familiar, impossibly familiar. Jason's voice dropped, cold and incredulous. Who the hell are you? The man didn't answer right away. His tone, when he finally spoke, was controlled. Quiet. Put your hand down. Jason. The voice was one I hadn't heard in years, and yet it hit me like the memory of sunlight after too much darkness. My breath caught. Ethan? Jason turned toward me, his expression twisting in disbelief. You know this guy? But I couldn't speak. My mind was a blur of fear and relief and confusion. Ethan stepped forward, his voice firm but calm. You're done here. The police are on their way. Jason laughed, that sharp, mocking laugh I once mistook for confidence. You're bluffing. But even he could hear the faint sound of sirens outside, carried through the rain. For a moment, the world shrank into silence. The kind that happens just before something irreversible. Jason's eyes darted between us, his chest rising and falling fast. Then he dropped his arm, muttered something under his breath, and backed away. The tension broke like a glass shattering in slow motion. I felt my knees give out. Ethan caught me before I hit the floor. You're safe, he said softly. You and the kids, you're safe now. The words didn't register at first. I just stared at the scattered clothes, the broken suitcase. The tiny pink sock. Safe. It didn't feel real yet. I heard the knock at the door. The police? Probably, and the muffled voice of Mrs. Carter, our elderly neighbor, calling my name. But all I could think was how surreal it was that this was how it ended, in the same living room where I once believed happiness lived. That night. After everything blurred into flashing lights and paperwork, I sat in the back of the ambulance with my children wrapped in blankets. Emily's head rested on my shoulder, her small voice barely a whisper. Mommy, she said, we can go home now? I swallowed hard. We are going home, sweetheart. Just a new one. The paramedic handed me a cup of water. I took it with shaking hands, staring out at the rain. That's when I realized I wasn't crying anymore. For years, I'd cried quietly, into pillows, into the sink, into silence. But not tonight. Tonight, something inside me had changed. It wasn't strength yet. Not forgiveness. But it was something close, the first spark of it. Later, when the kids were safe in the shelter and the house behind us was nothing more than a memory, I sat by the window and watched the rain slide down the glass, and for the first time, I began to tell my story, not as a victim, but as a survivor. That night, I whispered to myself. I thought it would be my last. I closed my eyes. The sound of thunder rolling in the distance, but I was wrong. It was the night I was reborn. When people ask me about my childhood, I usually say, it was fine. But fine is what you say when something hurts too much to explain. I was 8 when my mother died. I remember the smell of the hospital, bleach and rain. The nurse tried to hold my hand, but I kept staring at the door, waiting for someone to come through it. No one did. A week later, I was taken to St. Mary's Orphanage, a place painted in cheerful colors that never matched the silence inside. Everything there was tidy, efficient, and hollow, like a smile that didn't reach the eyes. The first night, I slept clutching my mother's necklace, a tiny gold pendant shaped like a crescent moon. The metal was cold, and I told myself that meant she was still close. At St. Mary's, love was scheduled. You got it on birthdays, holidays, or when visitors came to adopt. The rest of the time, you learned how to make yourself small, quiet, and obedient. If you cried too loud, the nuns told you to be grateful you have a bed. So I learned to cry into my pillow, silently, efficiently, like folding laundry. 6 months later, they told me someone had come to see me. I remember sitting in the visitor's room, legs swinging off the chair, palms sweating. The man who walked in looked tired, graying hair, a pressed shirt, a briefcase still in his hand. He looked at me for a long time before speaking. Morela? I nodded. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm your father. The word father felt heavy, foreign. I didn't know what to do with it. I expected him to hug me, to cry, to say he'd been looking for me. But he just stood there, like he wasn't sure how to touch something fragile. When he finally reached out, it was just to pat my shoulder. You'll come home with me now. Home. Another word I didn't understand anymore. The house was large and quiet. Too quiet. Susan, my stepmother, met me at the door. She smiled, politely, cautiously, like I was a guest, not a child. She showed me to my room. It was spotless, full of soft things that didn't feel like mine. The bed smelled like lavender instead of detergent. The walls were pale yellow, the kind of color people choose when they want to seem kind. Dinner's at 6, she said gently. Your father likes things on time. That became a pattern. Everything had a schedule. Breakfast at 7. Homework at 4. Dinner at 6. Richard read the paper while Susan served. I learned to sit straight, speak when spoken to, and never mention my mother. The first time I did, Richard's jaw tightened. We don't need to talk about the past, he said, but the past was all I had. One night, I heard them arguing. I was supposed to be asleep, but the walls in that house carried every whisper. She looks at me like I'm a stranger, my father said. She doesn't know you, Susan replied softly. You weren't there. I didn't know, he hissed. I didn't know she existed until her mother. He stopped. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. Didn't know? That was the first time I realized he might be lying. Years later, when I was 16. I found proof. I was looking for my birth certificate for a school trip when I found an old envelope tucked behind a drawer in my father's study. Inside were letters, yellowed, folded, written in my mother's handwriting. Each one began the same way. Richard, she's growing. She looks like you. Please come see her. She asks about you every day. The dates went back years before my mother's death. He had known. He just hadn't come. I sat on the floor, reading until the words blurred. When he found me, he didn't yell. He didn't apologize either. He just sighed and said, you wouldn't have understood. Maybe he was right. I didn't understand. I just knew that something in me broke that day, quietly, permanently. After that, I stopped trying to earn his affection. I stopped trying to be perfect. I started believing that love wasn't something freely given, it was something you had to work for, prove you deserved. And if you failed, it disappeared. It was the kind of belief that follows you like a shadow into adulthood, whispering in your ear every time someone gets close, don't mess this up. They'll leave, too. Susan tried, in her own way. She would leave small notes in my lunchbox, have a good day. Or, you're stronger than you think. Once, when Richard was away, she hugged me goodnight. I froze. It had been years since anyone held me like that. She must have felt me stiffen because she whispered, you don't have to earn love, sweetheart. You already have it. But when Richard returned, the distance returned with him. Susan became polite again. Quiet again, and I learned that kindness could be conditional. When I turned 18, I left home for college with a scholarship and a suitcase. Richard didn't hug me goodbye. He just said, make good choices. I promised I would, but I didn't know then that sometimes good choices are just the ones that don't hurt immediately. That belief, that love meant approval. And approval meant obedience, led me straight to the man who would prove me wrong in the cruelest way, the man I thought would give me the love I never had, the man who became my husband, Jason Caldwell. When I first met Ethan, it was raining. Seattle rain, soft, gray, endless, the kind that doesn't ask permission to stay. I was running late for my psychology lecture, juggling coffee and notebooks, when I collided with him at the doorway. My papers went flying like startled birds. I'm so sorry, he said, kneeling to help me gather them. His voice was calm, unhurried, like the world didn't scare him. It's fine, I murmured, though my coffee was dripping down his sleeve. He laughed. Well, now we're both caffeinated. That was Ethan. Always turning chaos into something gentle. We became friends first, the kind of friends who could talk for hours about nothing and everything. He was studying medicine. I was majoring in interior design. He said he liked how I saw beauty in small details. Sometimes he'd watch me sketch floor plans and say, you don't draw spaces, you draw feelings. And I'd laugh. Pretending it didn't make my heart tighten, because no one had ever seen me like that before. Ethan didn't need me to be perfect. He didn't ask me to prove anything. When I was with him, I forgot about earning love, it just existed. We'd sit on the steps outside the library at night, the city humming around us, his hand brushing mine. Once, he said, when you look at the world, it's like you're trying to fix something invisible. Maybe I was. Maybe I always had been. 2 years passed like that. Quiet. Warm. Almost safe. Then one evening, as the sun sank behind the skyline, he handed me a small velvet box. I got the internship, he said, smiling nervously. In Switzerland. It's huge, Morela. But I can't imagine going without you. I froze. He opened the box, a delicate silver ring, simple and honest, like him. Come with me, he whispered. Marry me. The world tilted, every part of me wanted to say yes. But somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, he'll leave. They always leave. My heart raced. My throat closed. I stepped back. Ethan? I can't. He blinked. You can't? Or you won't? I'm not ready, I said, though what I meant was I'm terrified. He tried to smile. Then I'll wait. But I shook my head. Don't. You shouldn't. It was the cruelest kindness I'd ever done. After he left for Europe, the campus felt colder. The spaces we used to fill with laughter turned into echoes. I buried myself in work, extra classes, design competitions, internships, anything that made me feel useful. That's when I met Jason Caldwell. He was everything Ethan wasn't: confident, magnetic, older. He spoke like his words carried gravity. The first time he noticed my project in class, he said, "You have vision, Morela. Don't waste it on small dreams." That single sentence hit me like sunlight through fog. Here was a man who saw potential, not fragility. Ambition, not fear. He invited me to coffee to discuss design, but the conversation drifted to life, success, passion. He told me he admired my drive. No one had ever used that word for me before. When he looked at me, I didn't feel like an abandoned child or a lost girl. I felt chosen. We started dating soon after I graduated. Jason was a rising star, young professor, published designer, everyone respected him. He made me feel lucky. Like being with him elevated me somehow. He'd take me to art galleries, wine tastings. Places where people used words like legacy and influence. He'd rest his hand on the small of my back and introduce me as my brilliant partner. And I'd smile, proud, even though something about the word partner felt performative, like I was an accessory he curated. Still, I ignored it. Because for the first time, I wasn't invisible. When I told my father about Jason, he said, "He's impressive. Finally, someone who matches your ambition." That was all the validation I needed. Even Susan, my stepmother, just nodded and said, "He looks like someone who gets what he wants." Back then, I thought that was a compliment. Our wedding was small, elegant, expensive. Jason planned most of it: the venue, the music, the guest list. When I asked if I could invite Ethan, who'd sent a kind message months earlier, Jason laughed. "You don't need ghosts at our wedding, sweetheart." He kissed my forehead, and for a moment, I felt safe again. But on the night of the reception, I saw something that should have warned me. Jason was talking to his colleagues, charming as always. I accidentally spilled a bit of champagne on his cuff. He turned, smile still plastered on his face, and whispered sharply, "Be careful, Morela. Don't embarrass me tonight." It was quiet, controlled, terrifyingly polite, and I smiled back, apologizing, because I was trained to. Ethan sent a wedding card from Zurich. It said, "I hope he knows how lucky he is. You deserve peace, Morela." I kept that card hidden in a drawer for years, a relic from the life I didn't choose. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I'd said yes that day by the library. Would things have been different? Would I have been different? Maybe. But back then, I still believed that love had to hurt a little to feel real. I didn't know that some kinds of love aren't meant to complete you, they're meant to consume you. And Jason Caldwell, he would soon prove how true that was. They said marriage was supposed to feel like coming home. For me, it felt like moving into a museum, beautiful, but nothing inside was truly mine. Jason and I bought a house overlooking Lake Union. A sleek glass and steel thing that looked like it belonged in a magazine. He called it our dream home. But soon, it became his stage. He arranged everything, from the furniture placement to the brand of wine we drank. When I suggested painting the nursery a soft yellow, he shook his head. "Gray is more sophisticated, Morela. Don't make it look childish." I laughed, pretending not to notice how he said "don't make it look childish" instead of "our child's room." The first time I realized something was off was 6 months into our marriage. I had stayed late at work, finishing a design presentation. When I came home, Jason was sitting in the dark living room, the glow of the TV outlining his face. "You didn't answer my calls," he said quietly. "I was in a meeting," I replied. He smiled, that tight, polite smile he used when he was angry. "I just worry, you know?" A woman working late, walking alone at night. People talk. It sounded caring, almost sweet. But something in his tone made my skin crawl. The next day, he showed up at my office with lunch. Then again the next day. And again. At first, I thought it was affection. Later, I realized it was surveillance. After Emily was born, things shifted. Jason told everyone at the hospital how lucky I was to have him. "She's not great with pain," he joked to the nurse as I lay exhausted. "But she tries." I smiled weakly, because that's what good wives do. They make excuses for cruelty back home. He insisted we hire no nanny. "A real mother raises her own children," he said. "I'll handle the finances. You handle the house." I didn't argue. I was too tired. Too numb. He'd criticize how I held the baby, how I folded laundry, how I talked. "You sound too emotional," he'd say. "Stop making that face. Why are you always tired? You don't even work." Each word chipped away at me. Like tiny cracks spreading through glass. When our second child, Ben, was born, Jason stopped pretending altogether. If dinner wasn't ready, he'd slam the cabinets. If the kids cried too loudly, he'd leave the room, muttering, "You can't even control them." One night, I burned the roast. He grabbed the plate and threw it into the sink so hard it shattered. "Useless," he hissed. I stood frozen, hands trembling, my children watching from the hallway. He didn't hit me that night. But he didn't need to. The fear itself did the damage. Years blurred together. Work, kids, tension. I stopped inviting friends over. I stopped answering calls. My father, Richard, once asked, "You sound tired, sweetheart. Everything okay?" And I lied, "Just busy with the kids." Because how do you explain to someone that your husband has made you disappear in your own life? By the time our youngest, Lily, was born, I had become a ghost. Jason still looked perfect in public, charming, generous, admired. He'd place a hand on my back at dinners, whispering compliments. But when we got home, he'd dissect everything I said. "You embarrassed me," he'd sneer. "Do you even think before you speak?" Sometimes he'd apologize afterward, bring flowers, whisper that he loved me. But the apologies came with rules. "Don't make me worry again. Don't push me." That's the trick of men like Jason. They convince you the cage is protection. The physical violence came slowly. Like a storm gathering strength. The first slap was almost accidental. He'd been shouting, I'd tried to explain, and his hand moved faster than his control. He froze. I froze, then he whispered, "Look what you made me do." And I believed him. Afterward, he cried. Bought me jewelry. Said he'd never do it again. And I believed that, too, because I needed to point one night, as I tucked Emily into bed. She whispered, "Mommy, I don't like when Daddy's home." I froze. "Why, baby?" "He makes you cry." Something inside me broke. All the excuses, all the denial, dissolved in that single sentence. Because now it wasn't just my fear, it was hers. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, studying the woman I had become, pale, hollow-eyed, silent. I whispered to my reflection, "You can't keep pretending this is love." And for the first time in years, I said it out loud, "I want to leave." But Jason must have sensed it. He always did. He started checking my phone, monitoring my bank accounts, asking who I talked to. Every lock had his key. Every secret had his shadow. Still, I began to plan, quietly, carefully, because if I stayed, I knew exactly how this story would end. They said marriage was a partnership. But with Jason, it was a performance, and I was the prop he kept polishing to prove how perfect his life looked. The world saw a power couple. But inside that beautiful house by the lake, I was nothing but the echo of my own silence, and somewhere deep down, I began to understand that surviving wasn't enough anymore. I had to escape. I used to believe monsters only existed in stories. Then I realized, sometimes, you marry one. It started quietly. Little pieces of resistance hidden in the smallest acts. I began saving cash from grocery trips, tucking the bills inside a hollow book on the top shelf. I scanned documents, deeds, insurance papers, medical records, emailing them to an address Jason didn't know existed. At night, when he slept beside me, I'd stare at the ceiling and whisper plans into the dark like prayers. It wasn't courage. It was survival. One morning, after Jason left for work, I walked across the street to Mrs. Carter's house, the elderly neighbor who always smiled kindly when she saw the bruises I pretended were accidents. Her kitchen smelled like cinnamon and dust. She poured tea and said, without pretense, "Sweetheart, you don't have to explain. I've heard enough." I froze. She pointed toward her window. "Walls here are thin. He yells louder than he thinks." Then she slid a small recorder across the table. "You might need this." That was the first time I realized, someone had been listening all along. Over the next few weeks, I collected what she called proof of patterns. Recordings, photos, statements. I hid them in a box labeled winter clothes in her attic. Then I called a women's shelter. They told me about a lawyer named Ava Lopez, calm voice, precise words. We'll help you file everything safely, Ava said. But timing is everything. You can't let him suspect a thing. I nodded. Though she couldn't see me through the phone. Timing. It was always about timing with Jason. The wrong word. The wrong look, and the storm would hit. I planned to leave on a Thursday. Jason had a conference out of town. I'd pack the essentials, take the kids to my father's, and meet Ava at the shelter the next morning. But life, as always, has its cruel sense of timing. Wednesday night. Jason came home early. The sound of his car in the driveway turned my blood to ice. He walked in, smiling, that calm, dangerous kind of smile. Going somewhere, Morela? My throat tightened. I was just cleaning. He looked around, at the half-packed suitcase, the missing photo frames, the faint smell of fear. You think I'm stupid? His voice was low, trembling with rage. After everything I gave you? He slammed his fist on the table, making the lamp flicker. The kids were upstairs. Emily's small voice whispered, Mommy. Stay upstairs. I shouted, heart pounding. Jason stepped closer. You're not taking them. You hear me? He grabbed my wrist, squeezing hard enough to leave marks. I could smell the whiskey on his breath then. A knock, sharp. Repeated. Urgent. Jason froze. Eyes narrowing. Who the hell? Before he could finish, the door swung open. Ethan. He looked different, older, broader, but those same steady eyes. The kind that didn't flinch. Let her go, he said evenly. Jason barked a laugh. Who invited you, hero? I did, said another voice, Susan's, trembling but firm. She stepped in behind Ethan, holding her phone. I called him. I couldn't reach you, Morela. I knew something was wrong. Jason's face twisted. You meddling, but before he could take another step, Mrs. Carter appeared at the door, holding a folder. I think the police might want this, she said. It was the box, the one from her attic. Inside were recordings, photos, proof, everything. The moment shattered. Jason's rage collapsed into panic. He shouted, cursed, tried to snatch the folder, but Ethan blocked him. You need to leave, Ethan said, voice cold now. Or I swear. Jason lunged, and Ethan shoved him back, hard enough to send him stumbling against the wall. The kids screamed upstairs. I ran to them, pulling Emily, Ben, and Lily into my arms. It's okay, I whispered. It's over. But even as I said it, I didn't quite believe it. Police sirens broke the silence. Minutes later, Jason was handcuffed in the driveway, shouting something about misunderstanding and manipulation. I stood barefoot on the porch, shaking. The rain had started, a fine mist that felt like mercy. Ethan draped his jacket over my shoulders. You're safe now, he murmured, and for the first time in years, I believed someone when they said that. At the station, I gave my statement. Ava arrived soon after, efficient and calm. She said, You did everything right. We'll take it from here. Everything right. For so long, I had been told I did everything wrong. That night, those words felt like freedom. The kids and I spent our first night away in a shelter apartment, small, quiet, with drawings on the walls made by other survivors' children. Emily slept beside me, her hand gripping mine. In the dim light, I could still see the outline of bruises on my wrist. But they didn't scare me anymore. They were proof that I had endured, not surrendered. When I closed my eyes, I remembered Jason's words, You'll never survive without me, and I almost smiled, because now, for the first time, I finally could. Ethan visited the next morning, bringing muffins from a bakery we used to love. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. He just sat beside me, quiet, steady, the way he always had, and in that silence, I realized something. The breaking point wasn't the night he hit me. It wasn't even the night I ran. It was the moment I finally understood that survival isn't staying alive, it's choosing to live. Freedom doesn't come with fireworks. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, like sunlight through blinds, falling on a bed that no longer smells of fear. The first morning at the shelter, I woke up to silence. No footsteps pacing the hallway. No sharp breath beside me. Just Emily's soft snore, Ben's little foot pressed against my side, and Lily's hand clutching my shirt. I lay there for a long time, listening to their breathing, and realized something simple but enormous. We were safe. The shelter was small, but it was alive. There were drawings taped on the walls, rainbows, hearts, stick figures holding hands. Women moved through the halls with quiet determination, carrying their children, carrying their scars. One of them, a woman named Carla, smiled at me over breakfast and said, You'll stop jumping at every sound soon. It just takes time. Time. That was the thing Jason never gave me, and now I had all of it. Ava Lopez, my lawyer, met me every week in a small office with beige walls and too many files. She was precise, steady, and fierce in a way that made me feel protected. We're filing for full custody, she said one afternoon. Given the evidence, it's not even a question. Her confidence felt like oxygen. Still, nights were hard. I'd lie awake, wondering if Jason would find us, if he'd twist the story, if the court would somehow believe him. Fear, after all, doesn't disappear just because the danger has. Ethan started visiting then, quietly, respectfully. He'd bring groceries, coloring books for the kids, sometimes just coffee. He never asked how I was. He just was there once, while I was sorting laundry. He said softly, "You don't have to be okay all the time, Morela." I froze, hands deep in the basket. For years, I'd lived behind that armor, pretending, performing, and hearing him say that, with no pity, no expectation. It felt like forgiveness, not from him, from myself. The court hearings were brutal. Jason tried to play the victim, tears, theatrics, stories of my emotional instability. But Ava was unshakable. She presented recordings, photos, medical reports. Even Mrs. Carter testified, her trembling voice steady with truth. When the judge finally said, "Primary custody awarded to the mother," I didn't cry. I just exhaled, a sound that felt like a lifetime leaving my lungs. We moved into a small apartment near the water. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. I painted the kids' room soft yellow, the color Jason once said was too childish. Now it felt like sunlight. The kids laughed more. Emily slept through the night again. Ben learned to ride a bike. Lily started humming to herself in the mornings, and me? I learned how to be a person again, not a shadow. Ethan came by often, never uninvited. Sometimes he'd fix a leaky faucet, or bring soup when one of the kids caught a cold. One evening, as the sky turned pink, I asked, "Why do you keep helping me?" He smiled, that same gentle smile from years ago. "Because you do the same for someone else." I wanted to say thank you, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I just nodded. Healing wasn't linear. There were days I couldn't stop shaking. Days I looked at my reflection and saw only the woman he tried to erase. But then, there were mornings when I woke up before the kids, made coffee, and opened the curtains, and it felt like reclaiming the world. Inch by inch. I started working again, part-time at a small design studio. My boss, a woman named Janelle, told me, "You have an eye for softness, maybe because you know what hardness looks like." I smiled. She was right. The night before our final court session, Ethan stopped by with pizza. The kids were asleep, and for once, the apartment was quiet. He looked around, at the toys scattered on the rug, the drawings on the fridge. The light in my eyes that hadn't been there before. "You built something beautiful here," he said. I laughed softly. "It's small." "It's yours," he replied. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because in that moment, for the first time since I could remember, I felt whole. The next day, the judge signed the final decree. Divorce granted. Custody confirmed. Jason's face when he lost, blank, stunned, hollow, but I didn't look at him for long. Because I wasn't there to win a battle. I was there to end a war. That night, I stood by the window of our new apartment, watching the city lights shimmer across the lake. Ethan had taken the kids for ice cream to celebrate. For once, I didn't feel afraid of being alone. I felt alive. I whispered to the reflection in the glass, "You did it." And in the soft hum of the city, I could almost hear my own voice answer back, "Yes. You survived." The kids were asleep. The city outside my window breathed softly, 1,000 lights shimmering across Lake Union, like constellations that had fallen to earth. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to terrify me. Now, it felt sacred. I sat at the small kitchen table, a cup of chamomile tea cooling beside me, and a blank page staring back. I hadn't written to Jason since the divorce. There was nothing left to say, or so I thought, but tonight, something inside me whispered, "Write it down. Not for him. For you." So, I picked up the pen. Jason, I wrote his name slowly, the letters strange beneath my hand. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe because silence feels heavier than words sometimes. Maybe because I need to see, in ink, that you no longer hold the power you once did. The pen didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. You used to say I was fragile. That I needed you to survive. For years, I believed that. I believed your anger was passion, your control was care, your cruelty was honesty. I paused, sipping the cold tea, tasting the bitterness. I believed that if I was perfect enough, you would stop breaking me. The words poured out faster now. All the things I had buried under years of fear and quiet obedience rose like ghosts, demanding to be seen. You turned our house into a prison and called it protection. You took the sound of my laughter and replaced it with silence. You made me apologize for bleeding. My pen scratched harder across the paper. But here's what you didn't destroy, Jason. You didn't destroy the mother who stayed up through every fever. The woman who still found ways to smile so our children could sleep without fear. You didn't destroy the part of me that believed in kindness, even when you showed me none. I leaned back in my chair. Outside, a fairy horn echoed across the water. Somewhere, a siren wailed, distant, fading. I wrote on, "When you said I'd never survive without you, I almost believed it. But now I wake up every morning and make breakfast for 3 kids who call me brave. I fix leaks, pay bills, tell bedtime stories, and still have enough strength left to laugh." You were wrong, Jason. I survived. I lived. I became. I stopped writing then, staring at the page filling with black ink and truth. It wasn't anger anymore, just release. I added one last line, you didn't break me. You bent me. But you never erased me. Then I set the pen down. I didn't fold the letter right away. I read it again, slowly, realizing it wasn't really to him. It was to the woman I used to be. The one who whispered apologies in the dark. The one who forgot her own name while trying to earn someone else's love, and for her, I felt only tenderness. I folded the letter and slipped it into a small box, the same one that once held our wedding photos. Inside were old mementos, a baby's hospital bracelet, a faded sketch I'd drawn of our first house, and a tiny heart-shaped button Emily had once found in the park. I placed the letter there, closed the lid, and whispered, rest. Because some memories deserve a grave, not a shrine. The doorbell rang softly. Ethan stood there, holding a small bouquet of tulips, yellow. My favorite color. Sorry, it's late, he said, smiling. I was passing by and thought the kids might like these. I took the flowers, warmth spreading through me. They'll love them. Come in. He stepped inside, glancing at the boxes of toys, the half-finished art projects on the table. This place feels alive, he said. It finally does, I replied. We sat on the balcony, the night air cool and sweet. Below us, the city glowed, endless and forgiving. Ethan didn't ask about the letter. He didn't need to. He just sat beside me, silent, the way he always had when words weren't enough. After a while, he said quietly, you know, when I first met you, you were always trying to fix broken things. I smiled faintly. Maybe because I was one of them. And now? He asked. Now, I said, watching the reflection of the moon ripple across the lake. I build new things instead. He nodded, and for a long time, we just breathed in the peace we had both earned, the kind that doesn't come from perfection, but from survival. Inside, I tucked the kids' blankets tighter before bed. Emily murmured in her sleep, good night, Mommy. Ben's tiny hand clutched a toy dinosaur. Lily sighed softly. Dreaming. I stood at the doorway, watching them, my chest swelling with something I hadn't felt in years, gratitude. Before turning off the lights, I looked once more at the box on the shelf, the one holding the letter I'd never send. It no longer felt like a reminder of pain. It felt like proof that I had walked through hell and come out carrying something beautiful, myself. As I climbed into bed, Ethan's jacket still draped over the chair, I whispered into the dark, goodbye, Jason. Not as a curse. As a blessing, for me, for the life I had reclaimed. And somewhere deep inside, I heard my own voice answer back, you didn't break me. You bent me. But you never erased me.